Hey everyone, how's it going? I hope you're all doing great and following the 3 H's of the channel. Now this weekend, I was listening to the song Werewolves of London, and then I thought, I hadn't made a video in a long time on werewolves and dogmen and all that stuff. So, that's what this video is going to be about. If that sounds like something you're interested in, pull up a stump and let's get into it. Thank you for watching. So me and my girlfriend both believe in the paranormal. Her mother lives on a farm somewhere around an hour from a well-populated area. We've known about a spirit there that we called the man in the fog. He kept his distance and rarely caused any trouble. Since my girlfriend's sister has had a baby, she's complained that at night there's something outside calling her name and tapping at the window, and bad things began to happen. Her fiancé left after losing his mind and having to go into a facility. And then when she tried to leave her mother's property, she got into an accident somehow. And then every dog or cat on the property began to vanish or mysteriously die. I learned about this when me and my girlfriend visited the other year. At first, I'm not gonna lie, I laughed it off as karma, as her sister was an awful person, very cruel to myself and to my girlfriend. But on this particular night, something happened, and it had nothing to do with the aforementioned man in the mist or man in the fog. So that night, my girlfriend and I slept in a makeshift bed in the back of her Kia Soul, as her mother's house is a mess, and we could also hotbox her car if we wanted to. We parked beneath her sister's window at the father's request. I normally don't sleep deeply, I'm a paranoid insomniac, but somehow I fell into a very deep sleep. My girlfriend, however, did not. So we were sleeping with my girlfriend's childhood pets, a cat and a terrier, a dog. So fast forward to around 3 o'clock in the morning. My girlfriend is watching YouTube on my computer, my laptop, and then she hears her dog outside the car begging to get in. She had locked the doors for safety, and I'm glad that she stopped herself just before opening the door. She saw her dog sleeping at her feet, just as asleep as I was, and her cat was at her other side, also asleep. And then she turned and looked through the rear window. A creature, well, at least the top half of a creature. She said that its face was like that of a dog, a German shepherd, more accurately, but its body was like that of a man. Just half the body was furry, and it was tapping and scratching at the hatchback. She grabbed a bat that she keeps in the car for protection, and then got out of the car threatening it and yelling at it. When this didn't work, and the thing took one step toward her, she retreated back into the car, until about an hour before dawn, the thing continued, looking at her through the rear window, tapping on the glass. She was so scared by this, it took me a long time after I woke up to calm her down. I even asked her to draw what she saw, but she wouldn't even do that. And that was sent in by Anonymous. I was camping with my brother along Lake Erie near Pickerel Creek Wildlife Area. This was just west of our home in Sandusky, Ohio, so that first night we went to sleep early. I woke up at around 2:30 a.m. because I had to take a leak. My brother was still fast asleep. The moon was almost full that night, so it gave off plenty of light for me to see everything outside the tent. There weren't really many bushes in the area around our campsite, so I didn't have to worry about or be afraid of something hiding and waiting to sneak up on me. I was walking away from our camp when I saw something. It just scared the crap out of me, not far from me. There were two dog-like creatures just standing there, staring at me. When I say standing, I mean on two legs. As you can imagine, I completely freaked out, and I started running back to the tent. I heard what sounded like they were chasing after me and making the strangest noises. Not so much a dog or a wolf sound, but more of something like a human. It was the scariest sound I'd ever heard. I was too afraid to turn around and look at them. I thought that at any second they would pounce on me and attack, but that never happened. When I made it back to the tent, I dove into it. I scared the crap out of my brother, who asked what the hell was going on. I told him what had just happened. He gave me a strange look and then laughed, telling me to shut up. I told him if he didn't believe me, to go out there himself and see. He laughed again and said, "Sure, I have to piss anyways." So I sat there and I watched him stand up and head out of the tent. I knew that this was serious and I couldn't just let him go out there by himself, so I followed him out of the tent and into the darkness. My eyes took a few seconds to adjust, but I could see him standing about 20 yards away, staring off at the trees. I walked over next to him and then looked in that direction too. We were staring into pitch black woods, but then, as my eyes adjusted, I could see something in the shadows. It was a part dog, part man creature. It didn't move or growl. It just stood there upright, staring at us. The dog part, the upper half anyways, looked like a German shepherd almost, but with yellow eyes and a more dog-like head, I guess. The human part started about mid-torso downward. It was standing on two legs like a man. The upper part was hairy like a dog, but the bottom half was hairless like a human man. I whispered to my brother and asked what the hell he thought it was. He said nothing. He was literally paralyzed with fear and shock. I grabbed him and pulled him back into the tent. As we ran back, the creature let out a horrific howl. The sound of that thing echoed through the trees. It was like nothing I had ever heard before. We dove into the tent and piled our backpacks and gear in front of the entrance, as if that was going to offer us any kind of protection. We were both absolutely terrified. He was shaking, and I felt like I had to throw up. I asked him for what we should do now, and he said that he didn't know, but if this thing got in our tent, it would kill us for sure. Then, we heard the dog-like howling in the distance, and we started to feel relieved, like it was leaving, even though that I knew it may have been the second creature that I had encountered earlier. And then it was answered by another howl, closer to us, like right outside of our tent. It followed us back to our tent. We then heard scratching and digging sounds. We were both screaming hysterically at this point, and then suddenly it stopped. There was nothing but silence. We waited inside the tent for at least 15 minutes, hoping that it had left. We decided to risk it and peek outside the tent. I grabbed a flashlight and peeked through the flap. I saw nothing. I waited a bit longer, and then looked out into the campsite. There was nothing there either. We decided to stay put in the tent until daylight. There was no way that we were going to walk through the dark woods toward my car in an attempt to escape these things. After what seemed like forever, the morning light started creeping through the forest canopy. We both slowly exited the tent and looked around us. There were large, canine and human-like prints all around the campsite, especially in a circle around the tent. We quickly gathered all of our gear and quickly hiked toward my car, which was parked in a lot about half a mile away. When we finally reached the car, the first thing that I noticed was a terrible stench. I didn't know what it was, but the odor was very strong. It was so strong that we smelled it after we got in and drove off. My brother believes that these creatures may have found the car and marked it as theirs. I wasn't sure if that was true, but the stench lingered in the car for days. When I got home, after dropping my brother off at his apartment, I started looking online in an attempt to find any answers, I read several accounts about things called Dogman sightings throughout Ohio, but none of them were from the area that we had been. This was years ago. My brother and I still enjoy the outdoors, but we have not returned to the area of our encounter. We are both much more aware of our surroundings when hiking and camping, but we just don't really talk about the encounter with each other. So this was not something that I witnessed personally, but instead one that my grandmother told me that my aunt later corroborated independently, so I think it's trustworthy. At the time, I'll note that there wasn't much talk of dogmen or werewolves, and this was about a decade before the infamous song came out. Although people did hear talk of wolves or werewolf-like monsters in Appalachia for a long time, so my aunt and grandmother just always called it the wolf thing. For a little background about my grandparents is currently my aunt's home. It's in the backwoods of western Grayson County, Virginia, which to this day is still sparsely populated, outside of one or two large towns on the east side, and back then, even less so. It was extremely thick forest, and still is, with hilly terrain in all directions. You have to get on a dirt path and follow it for about half a mile to get to a gravel-covered side road, and then follow that for about 30 minutes to reach a very small town just across the North Carolina border. As you can imagine, there would be a lot of wildlife in the area. A typical morning for my grandmother was making breakfast and sitting out on her porch, watching deer and rabbits eat at the shrubs. Sometimes she would also see or hear a bobcat, fox, or coyote about. On one occasion, a mountain lion and her cubs strolled right past the house. One animal she was familiar with in particular was a very, very large black bear who could be recognized by folks around those parts from a white patch on his chest and a hole in his left ear. My grandmother nicknamed him Captain because he had a habit of sitting on his haunches and reaching up with his paws to pick at apples, a motion that looked like he was saluting. Captain was a very big black bear, but he wasn't aggressive unless tested. He seemed to have an agreement with my grandmother and grandfather that if they left him alone, he would leave them alone. He would just stroll by the house every now and then to have some blackberries on the bushes or apples that had fallen down, which meant that he came by the house's yards often, as he was too big to climb trees much more, and the fruit trees around the house were low enough that he could reach up and pick food. My grandfather guesstimated that he was somewhere in the 500 to 600 pound range and roughly 6 feet tall, as my grandfather once measured scratch marks that he left on a tree. During this week, my grandmother noticed a very sharp decline in the animals nearby. It was the latter part of summer in a wet season, so most of the plants were in full bloom, and the leaves were all at their tenderest. Yet, she couldn't see the hide nor hair of any rabbits, deer, or anything coming to graze. A coyote that she had seen yapping every night for the past month just vanished. A few neighbors, by neighbors I mean people who lived within 5 miles, who stopped by, also told her that something had taken their dog and their chicken coop had been smashed into. They assumed that a mountain lion was lurking around. It had been around before, and they figured that that was what had done it, since it was the only thing that could feasibly take down a large farm dog. And not only that, they had seen Captain, the only other predator nearby, big enough to take down an 80-pound farm dog, in a whole other part of the area, gorging himself on a deer. They checked around and couldn't find anything. The next night, my grandmother was woken up by my aunt, who told her that she heard something bang against the outside of her wall. They checked around in the morning and found one of the deer that was butchered with a bloody smear on the wall. Judging from the way the gravel was disturbed, the deer had been walking by the house when something ambushed it, and in the struggle, it got smacked against the wall. My grandmother, having grown up in the woods, was familiar with predator kills and methods, Mountain lions tend to jump on the back and rake their claws across the flanks to hold on as they bite the neck. Black bears will usually break the neck or the back with their paws while biting the head, and the rare occasions coyotes attack deer, they usually do it by biting down on the inside of the leg and twisting to rip the muscle and arteries. But this kill clearly had the throat ripped out, but there weren't any claw marks to be found, and the bite looked narrower than what a cougar would do. Plus, she could gander there was only one predator from the way the ground had been disturbed, which didn't make sense for coyotes, as they typically hunted in pairs, since just one alone usually isn't enough to bring down a fully grown deer. After disposing of the carcass, the next few nights were relatively uneventful, except for the fact that several times my aunt or grandmother would be woken up in the middle of the night by the sound of something panting outside. Now, in these woods you can hear a pin drop if it's close enough at some point. They could swear the animal making the panting was directly outside the wall. One day my grandmother was picking some berries when she noticed what looked like dog tracks of a very large hound going through a mud flat bordering the nearby stream. And when she looked back, she saw the very distinctly canine face in much greater detail, because the animal had moved out from under cover, but instead of stepping out of the leaves like she thought it would at first, she soon noticed that it was instead standing up on its hind legs and peering over the shrubs. Now, she had seen canines standing upright before. Dogs do it, foxes can do it, coyotes sometimes do it. It was the size that took her off guard. She had been to that exact same thicket of shrubs just the other day, and her head only just barely reached the top, and my grandmother was about 5'3". This thing had its head pitched clear over the shrubs with a little extra visible, and usually when a predator is making no attempt to hide, it's usually because it's trying to intimidate someone. My grandmother managed to back away to the hill without turning around, and then when she started to get out of sight, the creature stepped out of the thicket on its hind legs. It strolled forward in a very uncanny way she had trouble describing, but she insisted and never went back down on all fours. Needless to say, she ran to the house in a backpedal sprint. That night, they heard the panting again, along with a distant howl and scraping sounds. They found the garage door, the back door frame, and the kitchen window frame all had claw marks on them from something investigating them. The canine creature was seen a few more times across that week by my grandmother and the neighbors, usually on or near the area of my family's property. My aunt finally saw it when she saw a pair of fuzzy ears outside of her window. Now she wasn't startled right off the bat, as Captain had come by her window a few times before, and she gradually lost some fear of the big bear over the years. But in his case, his ears just barely reached the edge of the windowsill, whereas in this case, you could clearly see them and the top of their owner's head. She quickly realized it wasn't the bear because of the pointed shape, the brown coloring, and the fact it had two fully intact ears. They also started to detect a very pungent smell on a side door porch. One time, finding what looked like urine or some other liquid stains on it, suggesting that an animal had scent marked it to claim the spot. It all came to a head on a Wednesday night when they heard howling in the distance grow closer. My grandmother flipped on the porch light and glimpsed the canine animal quickly sprinting across the lawn on its hind legs again. Her sighting confirmed how big it was. She'd seen timber wolves at the zoo up to 150 pounds, but she was certain that this was much more than twice its size. For several hours of the night, they could hear it roaming around the property and pressing against the doors like it was trying to find a way in. They glimpsed at several points the shine of yellow eyes peering in through the windows, as well as broad, long-fingered paws being pushed against the glass briefly. This was the day and age before cell phones, and 24-hour police service in some rural areas, so no one had means to immediately call the police. Instead, my grandmother had to wait arduous minutes on a dial line, with difficulty trying to call the police station 2 towns over. She was distracted by my aunt screaming and running into the bedroom to try and get some of the guns out. She had been sitting in the living room when she felt clicking against the glass, and then she saw, quote, that wolf thing pressing its face and bared teeth against the surface with its claws fully outstretched. Both of them started to try to get out rifles, shotguns, anything. It was becoming increasingly clear that the creature was trying to get into the house and knew that they were in there. They heard it once again panting through a wall, before there was the sound of heavy footsteps and a very loud thump. With a flash of fur on the edge of the window, they ran to the innermost room, the pantry locker, and stayed in there with guns. Now, it's not like in the movies when creatures roar, snarl, and hiss constantly, no matter what they're doing, but they did hear a commotion outside. My aunt and grandmother hadn't the faintest idea what was going on, and didn't investigate until the morning after, but they could tell something was antagonizing something, as occasional grunts, barks, and rumbles were audible through the blackness for about a minute, and then gradually moved off. They found no bodies, but there'd clearly been a ferocious altercation. The ground was ripped up in multiple spots, the wall had a dent in it, and there were some oxidized blood traces on the grass and dirt. My grandmother also found a trail where something had charged through the shrubs and recovered several vague dog prints, as well as wider tracks moving in the same direction. The animals all seemed to come back by the end of the week, and all of the howls stopped. When my grandfather came back home, he, my aunt, and some neighbors surveyed the area to make sure they couldn't find this wolf creature. Evidently, the neighbors had also heard howls around their property at night that stopped recently as well. They couldn't find it despite surveying the whole property, though they did find what looked like a track leading out of the property and running off into the mountains. Several days later, my grandmother saw Captain again, marking his territory by rubbing up against a tree in their yard and scratching the bark. He had several cuts across his muzzle. He was missing patches of fur. He had some healing bite wounds on his arm, and the hole in his ear had been torn open to the fact that he was missing half the ear flap. Other than that, and a slight limp that went away with time, he was fine. My aunt joked that he looked rather proud of himself. When he was told about the urine-like smell on the doorstep when the wolf creature was there running amok, my grandfather speculated that it was trying to claim the territory. Usually black bears are relatively docile, but evidently Captain took issue with this newcomer imposing on his space and became aggressive. So what my grandmother and aunt heard that night was the bear charging at it while it was distracted and trying to get in the house. While the wolf-looking creature was taller, it seemed skinnier and less massive, and apparently, in a confrontation and threat display that likely followed, sheer bulk won out. Apparently it decided it wasn't worth claiming the spot if it meant having to square off with a quarter ton of claws and teeth for it. Captain had run the intruder off to protect his territory and coincidentally helped my family. As a thank you, and so he could recover his strength quicker, my grandmother trimmed the apple trees to down all the fruit and let the bear enjoy himself without feeding him directly. We don't want to associate humans with food. Winter would be in a few months, and she wanted him fattened up so he could stick around for the next year, just in case. And as she put it, the forest will always have a boss, and it's better to have one who's not interested in eating you. Decades have gone by, and while both of my grandparents and Captain have passed, the Dogman creature never returned. There's been about 3 black bears who have moved into Captain's place since, and each of them has grown to be about as big as he was. Thankfully, that seems to have been enough to ward off any large canine creatures. So I found those encounters to be pretty intense and scary. What did you think? Let me know down in the comments. Did any of them in particular stick out to you? If so, also let me know down in the comments. If you have one of your own, I have an email in the description below that you can send them to if you'd like to. Also down there is a PayPal and a Patreon if you would like to support the channel that way, and memberships and super thanks here on YouTube. And with all of that said, I think I will see you in the next one. Thank you for pulling up a stump with me, as always. And thank you for watching. Have a good week, and I hope to see you Friday.